Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A shooting at a July 4th parade in Illinois leaves 6 people dead and more than 24 people wounded. The United Nations is concerned over the amount of migrant deaths occurring at the U.S.-Mexico border. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari has the details. And the Alberta government announces more funding help for Ukrainian refugees who are fleeing the war with Russia and coming to our province.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. At least 6 people are dead and more than 24 were injured following a shooting at a July 4th parade in Highland Park, Illinois. Panicked attendees could be seen running from the parade. Even as people ran, a band seemingly unaware of the gunfire continued to play. Police say it appears as though the shooting was from a roof. The parade had a heavy presence of both fire and police vehicles. Law enforcement say they're looking for a suspect who's described as a white male, 18 to 20 years of age with long black hair and a small build. The weapon used in the attack has been recovered from the scene. Police say the shooting occurred in the suburb located just north of Chicago around 10 a.m. local time. Residents of a mountain village in Mexico are praying that 3 local teenagers were not among the 53 migrants who died inside of a stifling hot trailer in Texas. Families and friends fear the worst following this recent attempt at human smuggling into the United States.
El apoyo para saber sobre nuestros hijos y pues al gobierno también estamos pidiendo la ayuda para que nos ayude con unos pasaportes para ir a verlos, poder ir a ver qué pasa con ellos porque ya son varios días y no tenemos ninguna información sobre ellos.
Siempre ha sido su deporte favorito y son muy buenos en eso.
A new report by the United Nations says the U.S.-Mexico border is the deadliest land crossing in the world. The UN says at least 728 deaths occurred there last year alone. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says migrants really need to think twice before fleeing their homeland, hoping to find milk and honey in the United States.
And look, it's the UN of all bodies to be calling this out. By the way, the UN would never make such a statement if it were not a glaring fact that it is a very dangerous crossing. And to have these families come over and risk their lives, it's irresponsible, if nothing more. And I do hope that migrants that are thinking about coming over think twice before coming over in a way that's legal and safe and healthy for their families.
Lisa Daftari will also discuss how the price of oil and gas may triple, thanks in large part to Russian President Vladimir Putin. She'll have details coming up after business news. The Alberta government announced that eligible Ukrainians arriving in our province will now have access to social supports, including temporary funding to cover basic expenses and a childcare subsidy. Officials say the new program will launch July 25th to provide up to 6 months of aids for Ukrainians who are fleeing the war with Russia. Premier Jason Kenney says Alberta has always been there to support Ukraine and will continue to do so.
Alberta has been forward-leaning, providing more support than any other province in Canada. We have provided $2.2 million for settlement and language services delivered across the province, $1 million to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and the Ukrainian Canadian Foundation. We provided $5 million of support to the Ukrainian World Congress to equip 5,000 members of the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Force with defensive equipment. And we also provided $5 million to the Canada-Ukraine Foundation for additional humanitarian aid, on top of $350,000 to the UCC Alberta chapter to assist them with their settlement efforts and providing equipment for people in Ukraine.
Alberta is home to 369,000 people of Ukrainian descent. A new letter bound for the legislature has been signed by over 70 Alberta municipalities which disagree with the province's plan to implement a provincial police force. There are mayors and politicians who have differing opinions on the matter, however. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains now, the potential decision to phase out the RCMP in Alberta has been a hot-button topic for quite some time.
That's a lot of money for taxpayers to be on the hook for.
The Prairie's director for the National Police Federation, Kevin Halwa, says the transition study from the Alberta government was vague, citing transition costs for a provincial police force would total $366 million over 6 years, along with an additional $139 million annually.
I would strongly suggest that $366 million is not even accurate anymore. I suspect that it's much, much higher than that. And again, that's if things are on time and on budget.
The organization calling themselves Keep Alberta RCMP says the federal government pays 30% of the RCMP policing costs in our province, which amounts to $185 million annually. UCP leadership candidate hopeful Danielle Smith is in favor of bringing in a provincial police force to Alberta. She says she has heard from residents that are frustrated about slow response times from the RCMP in rural and urban areas when it comes to crime.
So many of our calls that are being responded to are mental health calls, are addiction calls, and we need a force that can better connect people who are in that kind of distress with the health system and the services that they need to be able to get clean from drugs so that they can get back into having a normal, independent life.
Meanwhile, over in Colehurst, Alberta, the town receives policing from the Coaldale RCMP detachment and from the town of Picture Butte. Councillor Jesse Potry says the town is not in support of bringing in a provincial police force.
I don't see there being any benefit to the taxpayers of Colehurst because all I see is the additional tax burdens, whether it's tax through the provincial income taxes or other ways, right? But there's no tangible increased level of service that we've seen or any information given from the provincial government on that.
On the other side of Lethbridge sits the town of Coaldale, which is the only area in Alberta that has to pay 100% of the costs for the RCMP. Coaldale Mayor Jack Van Ryan acknowledged the provincial police force could be a more viable option.
We as a council currently have no problem with the RCMP. Our problem is with the RCMP's bosses in Ottawa.
Now, all of this is still speculation, as the Alberta government still hasn't committed as to whether they'll actually implement this provincial police force. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Hundreds of people gathered in both Calgary and Edmonton on Sunday to support women in the United States who are affected by the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to end constitutional protection for abortion. Rallies were held at the Alberta Legislature grounds and at a march in Calgary. The group in the Stampede City walked to Olympic Plaza yelling, "My body, my choice," and holding up signs about a woman's right to choose. On June 24th, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the historic Roe v. Wade case. It was a decision that provided women the constitutional right to abortion, and it has already triggered abortion bans in many U.S. states. Now, a number of pro-life groups around the world are celebrating the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to strike down Roe v. Wade. You can include the Wilberforce Project right here in Canada. Stephanie Fennelly is the group's executive director, and she joins us now from Edmonton. Stephanie, there were a number of pro-choice groups, however, that recently protested the Supreme Court's decision, and they've been pretty vocal. A number of those groups rallied right here in Alberta. What are your thoughts about these protests?
That is as we expected. With the passing decision of Roe versus Wade, we were expecting that pro-abortion supporters and politicians would get more vocal about their position. And that's what we're seeing here with the protests.
Now, do you think that will ever come to Canada, whereby the provinces, like the U.S. states, can be given more power implementing legislation to make abortions illegal?
Well, right now in Canada, the federal government can pass some decisions around the criminal state of abortion. And then provinces can actually make laws around regulations, things like defunding abortion, parental notification for a minor to have an abortion, something that a lot of parents are concerned about when their teenage daughter can have an abortion without consent. So currently we do see that there are 2 tiers inside of Canada, and where the provinces do have some room to pass legislation.
What are you hoping will happen next? Would you like to see the abortion debate reopen across Canada?
Oh, well, I think this rally is a good example. So, the pro-abortionists are asking for a conversation. That's what they're rallying for. So to the pro-lifers, I say this is wonderful. It's time. Canada's ready to have a mature conversation about abortion. So for all those who are pro-life and watching this video, let's do the same thing. Let's rally together, get support, be organized, and respond to this conversation. And I think it's time. So I really think our group is trying to identify all pro-lifers in the province. And in fact, so it's interesting, the rally had 100 people, I believe it was. Well, we run the largest pro-life banquet in Canada. This August, it'll be going roughly around 1,000 people. So get involved. This is a really good time to be part of the pro-life movement.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. That was Stephanie Fennelly, Executive Director of the Wilberforce Project, joining us from Edmonton. By the way, more details on the banquet Stephanie was talking about can be found on the Wilberforce Project's website. The University of Lethbridge recently received grants totaling more than $250,000 from the federal government. The funding came from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. The money will help researchers in various areas, including studying postpartum depression, managing physical activity, and finding out what the drivers behind cancel culture are. In a release, the U of L says these projects are part of 809 research initiatives from across Canada, receiving more than $175 million in funding from the federal government. A world-renowned graffiti artist has completed a 95-meter-high mural on the side of a building near Calgary's downtown core. The artist, known as Dime, used 500 cans of spray paint as part of a downtown renewal project.
So this mural is about 2 years in the making. We had the legendary graffiti artist Dime apply to the festival back in, I think, 2019. The project got delayed during COVID just because we couldn't have any international artists come into the country. And so it took a lot of planning. We actually had to install roof anchors because of the unconventional design of that wall. We actually had to core through the concrete for those outriggers to come out in order to hang a swing stage. He was here for well over 3 weeks working on this. And then, of course, we also had 3 local artists that were assisting him because this is a very big wall. So it's 310 feet, 9 inches. That's 95 meters. So it makes it the tallest painted mural in the world.
500 cans of paint. Wow, that's quite the piece of art. The province of Saskatchewan is seeking proposals for new addictions treatment spaces. The Health Ministry and the Saskatchewan Health Authority opened a procurement process of between 150 and 200 spaces across the province. The ministry currently funds 475 beds. Officials say addressing wait times and access to supports for substance use disorders is a strong priority. They say a key element will be to provide patients with wraparound holistic, evidence-based, and non-stigmatizing services. It appears as though Manitobans may be seeing a little relief at the gas pumps. The Canadian Automotive Association says Manitoba's average gas price on Sunday was just below $2.02 a litre. That was down about 5 cents from a week earlier. Prices are a few cents lower in some communities, including Winnipeg and Brandon. A gunman opened fire inside of a busy shopping mall in the Danish capital of Copenhagen on Sunday, killing 3 people and injuring 3 others. Witnesses described what happened. A 22-year-old Danish man was arrested following the shooting.
It's pure terror. This is awful, you know. You might wonder how a person could do this to other human beings, but it's beyond, you know, anything that's possible.
And then we were just done, and then everyone came running, and we thought, oh, maybe they have seen Harry Styles as he's in town. So we just, oh, but it's just a fun thing. But then when people started running and we saw the panic, and a guy with a pushing cart, he had a child in it, and it just fell over everything. So he just took the child and ran, and it's not a joke anymore, because then it was like quite serious. So we didn't know what to do, so we ran, people were guiding us towards the exit sign, and then we ran up the roof and were stuck there for a while. And then people were panicking all over the place and people crying, and so, yeah.
Maria is a lawyer turned soldier who's leading a brigade on the front lines of the largest ground war in Europe since the Second World War. Fighting in the Donbas region of Ukraine, she and her platoon are defending the area against Russia's fierce offensive to take control of their industrial heartland.
Тобто, якщо жінка виконує свої обов'язки і вона це спроможна робити, немає значення, жінка це чи чоловік. Ну, ще є такі моменти, що є і такі командири, які все ж таки притримуються більш старих тих понять, що все-таки, ну, це не жіноча справа, і тому не дуже сильно цьому сприяють. А так, взагалі, вже є всі можливості. Якщо в тебе є бажання, ти завжди можеш досягнути свої цілі і проявити себе, наскільки це можливо.
Meanwhile, other Ukrainian soldiers returning from the front lines in Ukraine's Donbas region have described the conditions there as hell on earth.
Нам щодня випускалися, я не хочу брехати, але дійсно ешелони боєприпасів по кожній будівлі. Тобто місто методично рівнялось. Танк виїжджає, Він навіть не знає, є там наші військові чи немає. А от будинок, як будь-який будинок, виїжджає, декілька танків, виїжджає, відстрілює весь боєкомплект, от прямо відстрілює по будівлі. І поки будівля не зруйнується, не рушає далі. Тобто вони застосовують тактику, коли ешелони боєприпасів випускають по місту для того, щоб зруйнувати місто і його перетворити на вижену пустелю.
As the front lines of war in Ukraine keep shifting, a number of churches in areas now under Russian control are reporting harassment from soldiers. Some even say they've been forced to leave their buildings. Andrew Boyd with Release International has more now in this report.
In areas of Ukraine now under Russian control, Release International is getting reports that some church buildings are being confiscated and evangelical Christians forbidden from gathering. A partner reports 4 churches in areas of Ukraine occupied by Russian separatists are now facing harassment. Armed men have conducted searches, confiscated equipment, and forced church members to leave their building. Manhush, 30 kilometers from Mariupol, Voice of the Martyrs say Russian soldiers drove Christians out of their prayer house and rehabilitation center. They did the same elsewhere. And a church member in Vasilievka said Russian officers came and closed the church. One church leader believes the Russian authorities may be targeting Protestant churches with Ukrainian registration. The Russians seem to regard everything Protestant as having come from the United States and insist that only the Russian Orthodox Church has the right to function in areas under their control. Another Release International partner, Pavel, not his real name, says many who remain are reaching out to help others under attack. It's cost some lives. Even as the missiles rained down, one church in Mariupol was providing food, water, and accommodation for local people. Some became Christians as a result, including one rescued from a burning basement.
The international animal rescue known as No Dogs Left Behind helped to secure and provide passage for cats and dogs left behind when U.S. troops evacuated Afghanistan last August. The final 10 dogs, which were originally left behind because they were too young to travel, have now arrived in Canada. They were brought to the group Sanctuary in Scarborough, Ontario.
The Americans had to leave Afghanistan. The war dogs and many dogs were left behind. They simply couldn't come, and the United States issued a ban, the CDC issued a ban on the importation of dogs from 113 countries, Afghanistan being one of them, so it was virtually impossible for the dogs to be evacuated to safety. I was called upon by a coalition to fly into Afghanistan to assess the dogs and to load them, pack them, transport them to safety, and bring a bunch of them to our amazing safe house here in Toronto. In Afghanistan, you're going through these checkpoints. You know, it's extremely nerve-wracking and scary. Probably the most fearful mission I've ever done. It's very complex in nature, getting all the paperwork done, and it's very complex in loading the dogs and making sure that the chips correspond, and that was what my responsibility was, make sure that the dogs are being loaded, they're being loaded safely. I'm looking at the condition of them and making sure that the paperwork matches, because when you land, customs comes, and it's got to be correct.
Some cute dogs. Great to see that no dogs were left behind. Well, the showers that we've been receiving should be leaving us fairly soon across much of southwestern Alberta. Complete weather details are coming up. Well, we had lots of clouds and showers again today in Lethbridge. Now, this was the scene earlier today at 36th Street North and 14th Avenue, which saw a bit of flooding due to all of the heavy rain we've received lately. Fortunately, a lot of that has been cleaned up. Tonight, however, there's a chance of more rain developing with a low near 9 degrees. Tuesday, just a few clouds are on tap with a high near 24. Wednesday, mainly sunny with a high of 27. Thursday, pretty much the same picture with a high again near 27 degrees. Friday, the mercury climbs even higher with a high near 29. Saturday, expect a few clouds mixed with sunshine and a high of 26. Sunday, mainly clear with a high near 27. Now, the average high for this time of year is 25 degrees with an average low of 10. The highest temperature ever recorded for this day was 38 degrees, set back in 2001, and the record low was +2 in 1999. The sun rose at 5:30 and set at 9:42. Checking the national forecast for Tuesday now, it should be mainly cloudy and 20 degrees in Victoria. A slight chance of showers developing and 19 for Vancouver. Periods of rain and 15 is on tap for Edmonton. A chance of thunder showers and 21 expected in Calgary. Overcast and 23 degrees for Regina on Tuesday. Light rain and 19 for Saskatoon. In Winnipeg, it should be mainly sunny with a high near 23. In the central part of the country, expect showers and 27 in Toronto. Light rain and 24 degrees in Ottawa. Rain and 21 degrees is on tap for Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, there's a good chance of rain developing and 26 in Fredericton. Increasing clouds and 24 in Halifax. Overcast and 24 degrees as well in Charlottetown. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect sun mixed with cloud and a high near 20 degrees on Tuesday. A new report by the Bank of Canada shows that price pressures have brought inflation to 40-year highs, and that will continue. The survey of executives and consumers found that Canada is also facing tight labor markets, and companies are being hit pretty hard by rising input costs. Markets are expecting another 75 basis point hike by the central bank on July 13th to help cool off inflation. That would bring the policy rate to 2.25%. The bank is expected to raise it up all the way to 3.5% by the end of the year. The benchmark rate, as you may remember, was as low as 0.25% back in March. On a more positive note, the central bank says there's still confidence the Bank of Canada can achieve its 2% inflation target and that price pressures will eventually ease. A weekend survey by FlightAware says 2/3 of Air Canada's flights took off late over the weekend. Meanwhile, its subsidiaries Swoop and WestJet had around 55% of their flights delayed. The review by the tracking service says among major airports in the world, Pearson International Airport in Mississauga came in second only to Guangzhou's main airport in China, with 53% of departures delayed. Montreal's International Airport, meanwhile, was sixth, with 43% of flights delayed. There was no information readily available tracking the percent of flights delayed at Western Canadian airports. Calgary-based Cathedral Energy Services says it's buying the drilling company Altitude Energy Partners, which has significant operations in Texas. Cathedral says the deal, worth around $100 million US, is aimed at growing its American business. Altitude is a portfolio company of Black Bay Energy Capital, and its most prominent operations are in the Permian Basin. Under the deal, Cathedral says it will pay close to $63 million in cash and issue around 67 million shares. West African leaders attended a regional summit in Ghana have agreed to lift sanctions on two countries led by military governments. The leadership in those nations have agreed to return to democratic rule. The summit also resolved to lift all economic sanctions imposed on both Burkina Faso and Mali. Both countries, however, will remain suspended from the regional bloc. Officials say Guinea, the third country under sanctions, received no reprieve because it did not submit an acceptable roadmap toward elections. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 167 points on the day to finish at 19,028. The Dow was up 321 points to 31,097. The S&P 500 was up 39 points to 3825, and the Nasdaq was up 99 on the day to 11,127. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 223 to 110.66 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 15 cents to 5.88 US. Gold was up 5.11 to 18.1654 US an ounce, and silver was up 11 cents to 19.99 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.50 per bushel, barley is at $9.25, canola is at $18, and corn is at $11.30 per bushel. Live cattle were up 203 to 134.60, feeder cattle were up 90 cents to 174.50, and lean hogs July contract was up 48 cents to 109.60. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 77.75 US. Recapping one of our top stories, at least 6 people are dead and more than 24 were injured following a shooting at a July 4th parade in Highland Park, Illinois. Police say the shooting appears to have originated from a roof where the weapon used in the attack was recovered. The shooter is still on the loose. Police say the suspect they're looking for is white, 18 to 20 years of age with long black hair and a small build. Police say the shooting occurred in the suburb located north of Chicago around 10 a.m. local time. The price of oil and gas could triple as the Ukrainian war with Russia drags on. And that's according to our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, who will explain why in just a moment. But first, Here's a look at some of the special events taking place right here in southwestern Alberta.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. The Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization is looking for volunteers to take part in their Drive Happiness program. This program is to help seniors in our community who are facing extreme loneliness due to a lack of accessible transportation. Volunteers will drive clients to their medical appointments, pick up groceries, and take them to important life activities. If you're interested in this opportunity and for more information, call 403-332-4320 or email volunteer@volunteerlethbridge.com. Lethbridge Legal Guidance is a nonprofit society offering free legal advice to low-income Southern Albertans. It holds clinics on Tuesdays from 4 to 6 p.m. by appointment only. Some of the areas the society assists in include family, criminal, traffic, immigration, EI, and other issues. For more information, call 403-380-6338 or visit their website, lethbridgelegalguidance.ca.
As millions of Americans celebrate their country's Independence Day, there's a group of left-leaning Americans who are not quite as patriotic. They're leading a movement called F the Fourth. The event was to be hosted by the Tucson Women's March. Now, to discuss this in more detail is U.S. political reporter and one of our regular contributors, Lisa Daftari, who joins us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, it appears as though a certain group of Democrats are coming across as a little less than patriotic.
Oh, yes. This story is just infuriating, especially for those of us who are extremely proud of this country and extremely happy to celebrate Independence Day here. But as you would have it, and as you would assume, in a time where cancel culture cancels just about everything, why wouldn't they just go ahead and cancel July 4th, which is exactly what they're doing, particularly on the heels of the Roe v. Wade being overturned and turned back to the states. They feel like this is, a great justification for hating America, and I'm seeing all across social media these memes that say this year 4th of July is canceled because women don't have independence, women don't have freedom, and really just playing this up as being anything more than just, a movement to use the Constitution to turn back abortion to the states. But again, even if it weren't, we're in a time where there's kneeling for the anthems and kneeling for the flag and disrespecting cops and disrespecting all kinds of patriotic symbols that really bring it back to our country, our forefathers, the flag, the anthem, and all of it. And as somebody who covers foreign affairs, I'm always tweeting and always saying, take a look at the countries around the world and then have that perspective of what we have here in the West, what we have here in the United States. And, it's a shame. It's a shame. And I'm happy that these women in the Women's March are being called out. Because again, they should take a look around the world and see when women in Afghanistan, for example, can't even leave their homes without a chaperone. They can't go to a doctor's appointment. They can't get divorces. They're 8 and 9 years old and being married off to their uncles. And they have the audacity to cancel the 4th. So as you can tell, I'm very, very, very passionate about this issue. And it's extremely difficult to see that there are these very ungrateful people living here.
Lisa, U.S. President Joe Biden's border with Mexico is the deadliest land crossing in the world. Now, that's according to the United Nations group, the International Organization of Migration. Now, a recent report by the agency suggests that more than 1,200 lives were lost during migration in the North, Central, and South Americas last year, and at least 728 deaths occurred along the U.S.-Mexico border.
Right. And that number is rising. We've had a record number of individuals trying to get over the border and a record number of lives lost. Just last week, there was 51 individuals who died in a truck trying to get over the border. And, it's just, again, the hypocrisy for those who are just about the humanitarian issue and these people have to get, and they just want to be so lax about immigration. Well, where are you on these issues? How about the humanitarian issue with it being so dangerous? Here in California, for example, last week they announced that immigrants across the board, regardless regardless of immigration status, will receive health care. When you make these kinds of announcements, when you entice and you offer these incentives, do you expect families with young children not to make that move when women don't have the proper health care, or they're pregnant, or they have young children, and they will trek over and try to make this trip? And look, it's the UN of all bodies to be calling this out. By the way, the UN would never make such a statement if it were not a glaring fact that it is a very dangerous crossing. And to have these families come over and risk their lives, it's irresponsible, if nothing more. And I do hope that migrants that are thinking about coming over think twice before coming over in a way that's legal and safe and healthy for their families. And until then, hopefully we can kind of diminish these numbers and diminish these tragedies.
The U.S. House Appropriations Committee has approved a ban on sending funding to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, Lisa, that's the Chinese lab at the heart of the controversy over the origin of the virus that sparked the COVID-19 pandemic.
Hal, you would think we wouldn't need a piece of legislature to make sure that this doesn't happen, that we just stop funding them. Forget about funding them. I mean, demanding transparency. The fact that we were funding them up to now is just crazy. But yes, there were a handful of lawmakers who came out and said enough is enough. We're not giving money anymore. This is the Appropriations Committee, and we don't want to be spending our money this way. So let's put a ban on supporting this lab. Now, I'm just going to make a little small bet here that there will be individuals on the left that will continue to maybe privately or personally fund this lab. For some reason, there's some sort of affinity towards this lab, and again, for allegedly spreading the virus, for being careless, for being the lack of transparency, and there may be much more and many more serious allegations towards this lab. But we'll leave it there. It's actually a good day when we can stop funding this lab.
Lisa, there are reports that Israel carried out a rare daylight airstrike along the southern Syria coast over the weekend. Now, what's the reason behind this latest offensive?
Yeah, it's a great question. Right now, not too many people are paying attention to this part of the world. But when you have a weak leader in the West, when you have someone like Joe Biden and the Democrats in charge at the White House and leading, for example, a charge to normalize relations with the Iranian regime that exports terror into the region, into Syria and Lebanon, into Gaza with Hamas, funding Hezbollah and funding the Houthis in Yemen, and the list goes on and on. When you have that kind of irresponsible support of a terror sponsor, then Israel has to take it into its own hands to defend itself. So what Israel has been doing is these very targeted attacks on the Iranian regime's assets in Syria. So it's basically a proxy war, but making sure that there are no civilians that are injured, and taking out these weapons depots. So the Iranian regime is hiding and storing weapons in Syria. And again, the Israelis have gone after not only Iran's assets in Syria, but has also been able to hit some of their nuclear infrastructures in Iran as well. Now, last week, there was a report that some Iranian leaders have gone on the record saying that the Israelis have truly put a dent in our intelligence apparatuses, both abroad and internally. So it just goes to show that these targeted attacks are working, and perhaps the best way to decrease the threat of the Iranian regime.
Lisa, some energy analysts said the price of oil could more than triple if Russia decides to cut its output amid record high gas prices. Not only here, but where you are as well, down in the United States. Their current price for a barrel of oil stands at around $110, but it could go as high as $380 a barrel.
Yeah, and you think of the ordinary people who have to go to work, pay a full tank of gas. It just doesn't make sense. And I think that's when we'll see, a lot of, eruption and protest. Hopefully, I mean, at that point, there should be some outcry to get those in charge to really take this more seriously. So JP Morgan came out. Their analysts are saying in a worst case scenario, which I don't agree with that phrasing, but they're calling it a worst case scenario. This may be much more of a kind of a no-brainer for Putin at this point, because what is his off-ramp? What is his exit from this in terms of a victory if he won't be able to put pressure on the West? We know that Putin is upset about the sanctions. We know that he's upset with the United States for really trying to squeeze him economically and punish him for the invasion of Ukraine. They're upset at the West, including Europe and the United States, for providing weapons to Ukraine and helping them out and supporting them in this war. So why wouldn't Russia use this as a weapon to really triple gas prices here in the West, especially now in the summer? So many families want to travel, and it's really affecting people's pockets. And that's where you will see a change at the polls. That's where you will see, and we've been saying this for a while. We have midterm elections coming up in the United States, and what's going to affect people more than anything else? It's not going to be Roe v. Wade. It's going to be people's pockets, people not being able to afford basic things like gasoline, like pharmaceutical supplies, like barbecues. Today's July 4th, and they're saying the cost of a barbecue is 16 to 20% more than it was last year. That's a tremendous number. And you're talking again about average families who just want to have a nice barbecue and enjoy the holiday. So we're going to be seeing a lot of changes here, and it's going to start at the pump.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. A lot of families, especially here in Canada as well, are looking forward to crossing our home and native land, going away to the mountains or maybe to the oceans, the beaches, and at $2 a litre. And if it goes up to $4 or $5 a litre, that'd be outrageously expensive. Lisa, not only did U.S. President Joe Biden kill Keystone XL, the pipeline, but he's also proposing blocking offshore drilling in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, but will allow some in the Gulf of Mexico. Tell me more.
Yeah, and some people are upset about this because they say you campaign on zero emissions and not allowing any of these land leases to go through. And now you're allowing the Gulf of Mexico, while others are saying, have you ever taken Econ 101? Because you obviously don't understand how this is all going to be resolved unless the U.S. starts drilling. Look, it's really 14 states have gone against the administration and have actually sued the administration to get their land leases back and to start drilling. And that's what makes sense. I mean, we can go on and on about this discussion, but obviously, again, here in California, in some places, it was almost up to $8 a gallon for gasoline. I think that's the most expensive in the nation, in the United States. So, you can understand why people are really pushing, not in California, but other parts of the country, to start the drilling and to pressure the Biden administration to really think twice about this zero emissions when it's not going to make a dent into anything. And again, the hypocrisy of all of these leaders who are pushing for zero emissions, but meanwhile, they have a caravan of SUVs taking them everywhere, and they have their private jets, and they have everything else giving off emissions. So a lot of hypocrisy, and just another day in Washington, D.C.
There appears to be a new threat on the Asian high seas. There are reports that 3 Chinese naval ships have been circling Japan for days. What's going on there?
Yeah, this is an interesting development. It's actually very typical of China to be flexing its muscles. It's almost like a parade, right? And going around and trying to provoke, if nothing more, get attention from its neighbors, and to say, we're here, we're in charge, we're spreading our influence, and you better like it. We know that Japan has really spoken out about the growing Chinese influence in that part of the world. And the United States is finally waking up to the fact that it may be even too late to stop the Chinese, but this is their agenda, and this is what they're marching forward with. And, optics like this, with them really just circling the seas for 3 days. Are they lost? Where are they going? It's obviously by design.
The World Cup of Soccer is coming up this November. Now, Lisa, we here in Canada are pretty excited with Team Canada qualifying for the first time in decades. But now the Department of Homeland Security in the U.S., where you are, will be on hand helping to ensure the tournament will be safe and secure for everyone in Qatar.
Yes, an interesting development, because the irony here is that the Department of Homeland Security can't even keep our southern border safe, as you said at the top of the segment. But they will be starting early. And as we know, that part of the world, obviously, a lot of embedded insurgents, a lot of bad characters, if nothing more than that. But we don't know where they'll be coming for, who they'll be coming for, who they'll be targeting. But for example, the Israelis were instructed not to go because they thought that, for example, the Iranian regime would have easy access to Israelis who'd be going there to watch the games. Soccer is extremely popular in that part of the world. So, you will have individuals coming from all different places, and a lot of people will look forward to meeting their enemies there. And that's why there will have to be a clean sweep of all of these bad actors. And to kind of help out with that, the Department of Homeland Security is getting involved and rolling up their sleeves early on to prepare for the November games.
I wonder if they'll also be involved in helping to clamp down on some of the human trafficking, which will also be taking place in that region, right?
Yeah, we hope so.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining us once again from Los Angeles, California.
My pleasure.
Well, the Christian church has been around a long time, but how church services are held and how the church functions have certainly changed. So what should it look like in modern times? Well, joining me to discuss this is Kelly Stickle, who is the lead pastor at Parallel Church in Lethbridge. Pastor Kelly, so great to have you on again. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jeanette. It's great to be with you again.
Awesome. Okay, so first of all, many viewers know your church by its former name, right, which was My Victory Church. So why the change, and what's the significance of your new name?
Yeah, well, that's a loaded question, but the big driving force behind that this last 2 years, as you know, and everyone of your viewers is well aware of, was very disruptive in multiple ways, not just with COVID, but with also a lot of the political disruption, a lot of race issues, especially south of the border, and a lot of, I think, a lot more divisiveness in culture as a whole. And I think for us, we wanted to stand out and saying, as a church, Jesus called us to unity. As a church, he called us to separate ourselves from society in many ways. And so we decided, in the midst of all the divisiveness, we wanted to come alongside. And so we chose the name Parallel to say we want to walk with people, we want to come alongside with people and be a voice that is opposite of what is becoming the norm in society today, and divides and divisiveness.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there you go. That was a loaded question with a loaded answer. Thank you for that. So, Kelly, your church slogan is for love and impact. So I think for years, many churches were known for what they stood against, right? But it's also important to let people know what the church is for. So it sounds like your church wants to be known for love and for having an impact on the community. So maybe you can unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, well, it really stood out to me, John 13, Jesus's conversation with his disciples. It carried on into John 15, of course, where multiple times he said, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you." And when Jesus gave that command, it wasn't an additional command to what we have in the Old Testament. It was in essence a replacement command that is the command that we as Christians are supposed to live by. So we're saying, okay, we're going to love, but we're not just going to love. That's a flowery word in society and misunderstood in many ways, but we're going to love like Jesus loved. And Jesus loved unconditionally. Jesus loved the outcast, those that were considered in his time the unlovable. And he extended love to the point of giving himself and his life in love for his friends, like it says. So we want to love like that. And we want to follow Jesus' command, but we don't want to just love like that. We want to have an impact in our community with that kind of love as well. And, Paul said in Galatians 5:6 that the faith that really matters, the faith that really counts, is the one that expresses itself through love. And that kind of became our guiding verse, saying we're going to impact our community, but we're going to do it the Jesus way and do it with love. And so that, again, we definitely want to be what we're known for, not what we stand against or who we stand against, but we want to be known as a church that comes alongside and loves and impacts.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes people who don't regularly attend church might see things through that lens of, us against them or the church versus society. So what does the church need to do to communicate to others that they are welcome to come as they are with all their imperfections without being judged? I mean, people are attending because they want some kind of direction, right?
Yeah, and I think part of the big shift for me, I've been pastoring for over 25 years now, and part of the big shift for me is that I've always pastored and led churches with it in mind of I want to get people in the community to come in to the church. And where I've shifted in many ways and seeing, what Jesus modeled and how Jesus did his ministry, but then also really studying the early church in the first 3 centuries in particular and how they modeled what Jesus instructed them to do. And I realized that, we can't just wait for the community to come to us when they're ready. We really need to go to them. And I know that sounds, cliche and that sounds easy to do, but no, wait a second, we put all of our energies, all of our finances, all of our staffing as a church, all of our monies into weekend services and hoping that people are going to show up to that. And we're like, no, wait a second. Let's reposition how we do church, what we think about church, and let's invest more in going to the community throughout the week rather than expecting the community to come to us. So I think the biggest divide has been when we've created the church as a gathering place, a social club that gathers once a week, and saying, no, that's not what we're called to be. We're called to not attend church, we're called to be the church. And so let's go to the community and reach them rather than waiting for them to come to us.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Now, I know on your church website, you actually invite people to these house parties. So what's that all about?
Yeah, well, we looked at everything, all the language we use, and we realized that a lot of the small groups that we have, and small groups is a cliche for a lot of Christians, that people are like, I don't really want to be a small group, and they look at it as a Bible study where one person's going to teach them, and they're not sure if they're going to agree, and they'd have to go with people they don't like. We're like, no, everywhere Jesus went, he threw a party, and it was a lot more about relational connection. Again, studying Jesus's ministry, he was all about the relational connections, and he would he wanted to go to Zacchaeus' house and have a party, and he never taught it did anything. Just the relational connection led to Zacchaeus' salvation. So we wanted to really emphasize the gathering, especially throughout COVID and all the rest of it. We wanted to really emphasize the relational side of things, and said, hey, let's just rephrase that to house parties. And in the midst of the relationships, it's amazing. The deeper the relationships, the more spiritual the conversations become, and the deeper we can go into scriptures when we have relationship and when we have trust. And so we wanted to start with that on that basis first, and then instead of saying small group, hey, let's have a house party, let's gather together, hang out, watch a hockey game if we need to, whatever it's going to take, just to gather.
Yeah, and I'm just curious too, with COVID, I would imagine it was very difficult to do those small groups, those house parties. They were non-existent pretty much, and so it's so nice to open up people's homes again and invite others in. But have you found that attendance is a little bit different ever since that whole pandemic took place? It's like people were in a momentum, COVID happened, and it's like the world just stopped, and so many people's interests have changed. And how have you found that, and how have you dealt with it?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have discovered that there's a difference in attendance, but again, as a pastor, I wasn't panicking to the degree of saying, well, people aren't coming back to the church. It's like when I hear that from pastors and from leaders, I begin to question, going, well, again, that weekly social gathering that at a building, is that the church, or is Christians, and how do we reach them? We're reaching them at different levels. So I'm not so worried about, who, is attending or not attending, or how often they're attending, or our numbers back, pre-pandemic. What I really want to focus on is are we equipping the church to reach them and making a difference and an impact in the community? And our attendance did, take big hits like everybody else's and go through that. happily, we're right back on track and going again and excited. But our focus as pastors and as leaders has really shifted in saying, okay, let's not put all of our energy into just getting bums in the seat on a Sunday and think that that's church. Let's equip the saints to do the work of the ministry throughout the week.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Kelly, you believe that a church should choose unity over uniformity, right? So, which means like aligning, even if we don't agree on everything. So that can be a challenge, obviously, when we live in a time like now where there's so much division, as you've been talking about. And of course, we're living in this cancel culture now. So what does it take to stay in alignment with one another if we see things differently?
Well, I think it's of utmost importance for us as Christ followers to make that a priority, because Jesus made it a priority. His final prayer that we have recorded, that he prayed over his disciples, he didn't pray, keep them protected. He didn't pray, keep them theologically correct, keep them baptizing the right way, taking communion the right way. He said, make them one. And his main prayer was for unity. So I think as the church, we need to make that as a priority and model that for the rest of the world. Where it comes to unity, not uniformity, is if we value unity over uniformity, meaning that we don't have to all agree to be in unity. We can be in unity even if we disagree, especially if we disagree. And I think our society as a whole has lost the challenge culture, the willingness to question, the willingness to debate. We've lost that art in some way, and I think that's very dangerous because we have polarizing sides. Everybody's splitting up and going into their own little camps, and I think it's very easy on both sides of the camps to get deceived and to go off the rails too far when we stop challenging and debating and questioning and learning how to do that. I think we need to get back to some of that and saying it's okay to question, it's okay to challenge, it's okay to argue, as long as we value the relationship and the unity over whether or not we agree.
Now, how do you go about handling things when you may have someone who visits your church, but they're opposed to some of the things that you teach and believe in? Do you still welcome them, and do you still offer to help them if they need assistance in some area?
Yeah, absolutely. Without question, we make as much as we possibly can. We work with those who are willing to work with us, regardless of their backgrounds, their beliefs. We have a lot of different backgrounds and different belief systems and a lot of people that have been raised in church, lots that haven't, lots that have been raised in way different denominations or belief systems than what we preach. And so we have a whole bunch of those that come in there, lots from polar opposite sides, politically, polar opposite sides, religion, when it comes to religion and belief systems, all of that. And yet we are able to work and do that. And part of that is just setting a culture to say, hey, we're going to value unity over agreeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we tend to meet as we normally do in church buildings, and you were kind of alluding to this earlier, and we're encouraged to invite people to join us. However, the early church also did a lot of taking the church to where people are instead of having them come to a church building, like what you were saying earlier. So what does that look like in today's culture?
Well, I think the church needs to take its job back in many ways. Where what I mean by that is the way that the early church got into the community is that, and you see it right in the book of Acts right away, and then doing historical studies of some of the practices of the early church, especially in the first 3 centuries. The early church was known for Romans would write about the church, and what they were known for is their care of the least of these. It was their care for the needy. And they would, in Acts chapter 2, there was no need among them. It's repeated in Acts chapter 4, right? They shared with everything. Everyone had everything in common. There's no need among them. They made sure that there was no need in their vicinity, and the church would reach out into the community and help the widows and the orphans and the poor and feed the hungry. And the church actually grew historically grew the greatest in the 3rd century. So it entered the year 200 with 200,000 Christians estimated on the planet. And by the year 300 AD, there was 6 million Christians on the planet. In the midst of all that, what happened? Well, in 249, there was what's called the Cyprian plague that lasted 20 years and wiped out a fifth of the Roman Empire. What's fascinating is in the midst of that plague, it was Christians that went in. The church went in, ministered to the sick and to the dying. Many of them died themselves, but in that, they offered hope when the rest of society was hopeless. And because of that, the church grew. And I think that's where we got to take our job back and get into the community and find needs in our community. And it should be the church that steps up and feeds the hungry, gives water to the thirsty. All the things that Jesus said in Matthew 25 are still great needs today. And I think we need to step up and take that job back.
Well said. It looks like we're almost out of time, but Kelly, any final thoughts on where today's church should be heading and what we need to do to be more effective in touching people's lives?
I'm more excited than ever with the church, the conversations that I'm having with pastors, with leaders, with where the church is at. I think, we can look at, COVID as the great disruptor, but I really think we're going to look back in history and saying it was the great revealer, where I think a lot of us as pastors or leaders are asking the right questions, having the right conversations. And I think the church of the future, I'm more excited about the church of the future than I've ever been. And excited that it's stepping up and taking its job back and being more than just a weekly gathering.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Pastor Kelly. Really appreciate having you on once again.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeanette. It's great.
Absolutely. Kelly Stickle is the pastor at Parallel Church in Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.